The mess hall at Fort Benning buzzed with the usual cacophony of military chatter when Private Sarah Chen walked in that sweltering Tuesday morning in July, her sleeves rolled up against the oppressive Georgia heat that made even seasoned soldiers uncomfortable. What should have been another routine breakfast in a series of countless identical mornings became the pivotal moment that would change everything she thought she knew about her life and purpose. As she reached for her standard-issue aluminum tray, moving through the serving line with the mechanical precision that months of military routine had drilled into her bones, the harsh fluorescent lights overhead caught something distinctive on her left forearm, a peculiar tattoo that made Sergeant Martinez stop mid-bite of his scrambled eggs. The design was unlike anything he'd encountered in his 15 years of military service across 3 different continents. Intricate geometric patterns interwoven with symbols that seemed almost ancient, yet somehow familiar, in a way that made his subconscious mind race through half-remembered briefings and classified documents. His fork clattered against his metal plate with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet dining facility as recognition flickered somewhere in the depths of his trained mind. Though he couldn't quite place why this particular marking made his blood run cold with an inexplicable sense of dread. Sarah noticed the stares radiating from every corner of the mess hall, but said nothing, having grown accustomed over the past several months to the ridicule and unwanted attention that her unusual body art generated among her fellow soldiers. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 8 months, her fellow soldiers had mocked what they dismissively called her weird art project, never imagining in their wildest speculation that this seemingly random collection of lines, curves, and geometric shapes would soon bring NATO officials from 3 different countries to their knees in recognition and respect. The relentless mockery had started on Sarah's very first day at Fort Benning, beginning almost immediately after she completed the standard in-processing procedures that transformed civilians into soldiers. Fresh out of basic training at Fort Moore, where she had managed to keep her tattoo hidden beneath regulation long sleeves despite the brutal heat and physical demands, she was just another unremarkable face in the endless crowd of new recruits, until someone with sharp eyes spotted the intricate design during mandatory physical training. "What's that supposed to be, Chen? Your horoscope written in some kind of alien language?" Private Jackson had sneered with the particular cruelty that young men often display when trying to establish dominance in a new social hierarchy, his pointing finger drawing unwanted attention to the complex design that wrapped around her forearm like an ancient bracelet crafted by master artisans from a lost civilization. The other recruits, sensing an opportunity to bond through shared ridicule and desperate to avoid becoming targets themselves, eagerly joined in the harassment, creating increasingly elaborate and ridiculous theories about the tattoo's meaning. Everything from a failed art school project that she couldn't afford to have removed to some kind of New Age spiritual nonsense that marked her as one of those California millennials who believed in crystals and chakras. Sarah never defended the tattoo, never offered explanations or justifications, never rose to their bait or showed the emotional reaction they were clearly seeking, which only fueled more speculation and increasingly creative attempts to provoke her. She would simply roll her sleeves back down to regulation length and continue with her assigned duties, maintaining the kind of quiet, unshakable professionalism that her superior officers respected and noted in her personnel file, but which her peers found somehow suspicious and irritating in ways they couldn't fully articulate. What none of them knew, what Sarah herself barely understood, despite living with the mystery every single day, was that she didn't fully comprehend the tattoo's significance or origins beyond the fragments her grandmother had shared. It had been her grandmother's final gift to her, inked into her skin during a marathon 8-hour session just 3 weeks before the old woman's death from the cancer that had been quietly consuming her for 2 years, accompanied only by cryptic, whispered words about remembering the family legacy and honoring those who came before, that it seemed like the rambling of someone heavily medicated for pain. The ridicule intensified dramatically over the following weeks as word spread throughout the base about the strange new recruit with the weird tattoo, transforming her from anonymous newcomer to reluctant celebrity in the worst possible way. During field exercises that tested their tactical knowledge and physical endurance, soldiers would whisper and point whenever Sarah's tattoo became visible through fabric torn during obstacle courses, or when she rolled up her sleeves to work on equipment maintenance in the motor pool. Some claimed with absolute certainty that the intricate patterns looked like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, the kind they'd seen in documentaries about pyramid construction and pharaohs' tombs, while others insisted just as firmly that the design resembled Nordic runes, like those carved into Viking runestones scattered across Scandinavia, but the vast majority simply dismissed it as another millennial's misguided attempt at being different and edgy in a military environment that valued conformity above almost everything else. Sergeant Riley, a man known throughout Fort Benning for his harsh tongue and legendary ability to reduce grown men to tears with nothing more than carefully chosen words, made Sarah's tattoo a running joke during his morning inspections that drew crowds of soldiers hoping to witness another verbal evisceration. "Chen, did you get that thing done at a truck stop tattoo parlor by some guy named Crazy Eddie, who was probably high on methamphetamines?" He would bark, with the kind of theatrical cruelty that he had perfected over 2 decades of military service, his voice carrying across the entire formation and causing eruptions of nervous laughter throughout the ranks that echoed off the surrounding buildings like thunder. The harassment reached its absolute peak during a particularly brutal training exercise designed to test soldiers' ability to function under extreme physical and mental stress, when Private Davidson, emboldened by the group dynamic and seeking to impress his peers, loudly suggested that Sarah's magic symbols might help her navigate the obstacle course better than conventional military training. The comment drew appreciative laughs, even from some of the instructors who should have known better than to encourage such unprofessional behavior, but who were themselves curious about the unusual recruit who seemed completely impervious to their attempts at intimidation. But Sarah endured every insult, every cruel joke, every pointed stare with the same stoic silence that had defined her military career since the day she raised her right hand and took the oath of enlistment, never revealing to anyone that each night, alone in her barracks bunk after lights out, she would trace the intricate patterns with her fingertip while listening to her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory, whispering about family secrets that must never be forgotten and responsibilities that passed from one generation to the next like sacred flames that could never be allowed to die. Everything changed with devastating suddenness the morning Colonel Harrison received an encrypted message that arrived through communication channels so highly classified that the mere existence of such systems was known only to a handful of personnel at Fort Benning, and the protocols for accessing them required security clearances that took decades to earn. The message materialized on his secure terminal at exactly 3:47 hours, the ungodly time disrupting his sleep and immediately triggering automated security measures that transformed his modest office into an electronically isolated fortress of secrecy within seconds. The communication itself was deceptively brief, but carried an urgency that made his hands shake as he read the words that would change everything. NATO intelligence requires immediate verification of designation Epsilon 7 markings reportedly present at your facility. Highest priority operational directive. Absolute discretion required under pain of court-martial. Operational security level Omega Black. Acknowledge receipt immediately. Colonel Harrison had served his country with distinction for 23 grueling years across multiple theaters of operation, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan. without ever encountering anything related to the mysterious designation Epsilon 7. But the security protocols accompanying the message left absolutely no doubt about its earth-shaking importance. The mention of Omega Black level security made his hands tremble uncontrollably. Throughout his entire military career, he had only heard whispers and rumors about operations that required such astronomical levels of clearance, the kind of missions that existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and complete deniability. Within 3 hours of receiving that fateful message, his once quiet office had been transformed into a secure communications hub, buzzing with activity as intelligence officers from multiple agencies that he didn't even know existed coordinated what they euphemistically referred to as a routine personnel review. Surveillance equipment that Harrison had never known existed on his base suddenly came online with capabilities that bordered on science fiction, providing coverage so comprehensive and detailed that every movement of every soldier was being monitored, recorded, and analyzed by computers that could identify individual faces from satellite imagery taken from low Earth orbit. The colonel found himself staring in fascination and growing horror at surveillance footage of his own base, watching his soldiers go about their seemingly routine daily activities while teams of analysts in underground facilities in Washington scrutinized every frame with equipment sophisticated enough to read the text on a newspaper from an altitude of 20 miles. When the analysts finally identified their target, after hours of painstaking digital investigation, Colonel Harrison felt the ground shift beneath his feet as everything he thought he knew about military service crumbled into dust. The NATO delegation that arrived at Fort Benning 18 hours later came under the carefully constructed cover story of a routine multinational training exercise, complete with fabricated documentation and a paper trail that would satisfy even the most paranoid investigator. But Colonel Harrison knew better from the moment their convoy of unmarked vehicles passed through the main gate. He had seen enough classified operations during his long career to recognize the telltale signs that marked truly dangerous people. The unmarked vehicles with government license plates that traced back to shell companies, the personnel who introduced themselves with obviously false first names and refused to make eye contact for more than a few seconds, and the way ordinary conversation stopped dead whenever certain topics arose in their presence. Leading this formidable group was a woman who identified herself with suspicious simplicity as Agent Reeves, though everything about her bearing, her confident stride, and the way other dangerous people deferred to her authority suggested rank and responsibility far beyond what her unremarkable civilian clothes were intended to imply. She moved through the base with the calculated precision of someone who had operated successfully in environments where a single mistake, one moment of inattention or poor judgment meant not just mission failure, but immediate death. Her eyes held the particular kind of intelligence that came only from years of making life and death decisions that affected the fate of entire nations, and when she spoke, even hardened combat veterans with multiple deployments found themselves listening with the attention usually reserved for direct orders from commanding officers. Her first request, delivered with the kind of quiet urgency that made smart people pay attention, sent visible shockwaves through Fort Benning's entire command structure. She wanted to see Private Chen's tattoo, and she wanted to see it immediately, without delay, without questions, and without any possibility of refusal. The barely controlled urgency in her voice made it crystal clear that this wasn't about satisfying academic curiosity or completing routine paperwork. Lives hung in the balance, possibly thousands of them, and time was running out faster than anyone wanted to admit. As Colonel Harrison hastily arranged the meeting while trying to maintain some semblance of normal base operations, he couldn't shake the growing feeling that his quiet military installation was about to become the epicenter of something much larger, much more dangerous, and much more consequential than anyone had dared to imagine. When Agent Reeves first laid eyes on Sarah's tattoo during the hastily arranged inspection in a secure conference room that had been swept for electronic surveillance 3 times in the past hour, the color drained from her face so completely that she looked like she had seen a ghost from her darkest nightmares. Without hesitation or explanation, she immediately activated a secure communication device that Colonel Harrison hadn't even noticed her carrying, despite his years of training in recognizing concealed equipment, and began speaking in rapid, hushed tones to someone on the other end of the encrypted connection, using technical terminology and code words that made even Harrison's top-secret security clearance seem laughably inadequate for the conversation taking place in front of him. Udbran confirm positive identification of Epsilon 7 heritage marking, pattern classification Alpha Prime, sub-designation Cardinal 7, she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible, but carrying the accumulated weight of decades of classified operations and carefully buried secrets that could topple governments if they ever saw daylight. The other NATO officials, men and women who had clearly seen enough classified operations to remain calm under almost any circumstances, gathered around Sarah like archaeologists who had just discovered the tomb of an unknown pharaoh, their professional expressions shifting from detached curiosity to something approaching religious awe as they examined the intricate patterns with the intensity of scholars studying ancient scrolls. One of them, a grizzled older man whose face bore the kind of scars that spoke eloquently of battles fought in places that didn't appear on any official maps, actually stepped backward involuntarily as if the tattoo posed some kind of immediate physical threat to his personal safety or sanity. Sarah stood motionless in the center of this controlled chaos, her military training keeping her at attention while her mind raced to process the fact that she was finally beginning to understand that her grandmother's cryptic references to family legacy had been far more significant than she had ever dared to imagine in her wildest dreams. The patterns inked permanently into her skin weren't just decorative elements chosen for their aesthetic appeal or personal meaning. They were something far more consequential, a genetic passport that served as proof of a bloodline that had served in the deepest shadows for multiple generations, protecting secrets that could literally change the balance of power between nations. As Agent Reeves continued her urgent consultation while simultaneously examining the tattoo, with equipment that seemed to belong in a science fiction movie, Sarah realized with growing amazement and terror that her entire life, every seemingly random event and coincidence, had been carefully orchestrated preparation for something she never knew existed. The truth emerged in carefully controlled fragments over the following 6 hours, each revelation more stunning and unbelievable than the last, accompanied by documentation so classified that simply being in the same room with it required security clearances that took decades to earn, and oaths that carried lethal consequences for violation. Sarah's beloved grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died, in what she had always been told was a random car accident, hadn't been the simple Portuguese immigrant she had claimed to be throughout Sarah's childhood. She was Maria Santos, a legendary operative whose exploits had become the stuff of whispered legends among intelligence professionals who served as a crucial bridge between American and European intelligence services during the most dangerous and volatile years of the Cold War. The intricate tattoo that had made Sarah a target for months of ridicule represented membership in a program so highly classified that its very existence was known only to a carefully selected group of individuals in NATO command, each one personally sworn to secrecy by oaths that made their military enlistment contracts look like parking tickets in comparison. These genetic operatives, chosen through a selection process that evaluated not just their individual capabilities, but their inherited traits spanning multiple generations, possessed a unique combination of psychological resilience, cultural adaptability, and instinctive survival skills that had been instrumental in operations spanning 5 decades and 3 continents. They communicated through an elaborate system of symbols that appeared to be meaningless decorative art to untrained observers, but conveyed specific operational codes, safe house locations, emergency extraction protocols, and threat assessments to those who had been initiated into their deadly secrets through years of training that made Special Forces qualification look like summer camp. Sarah's tattoo wasn't just a sentimental family heirloom or a way to honor her grandmother's memory. It was an active communication device whose patterns encoded critical information about sleeper cells, weapons caches, emergency protocols, and operational assets that remained relevant and potentially life-saving to ongoing operations across the globe. As the pieces of this incredible puzzle fell into place with terrifying clarity, Sarah finally understood why her grandmother had insisted on the tattoo. Despite Sarah's protests about the pain, the expense, and the permanent commitment, and why the old woman's final words had emphasized the critical importance of never forgetting their family's true purpose in the shadow war that most people never knew existed. The same soldiers who had spent months mocking Sarah's tattoo with creative cruelty now watched in stunned, uncomfortable silence as NATO officials treated her with the kind of reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients, fallen heroes, and heads of state. Agent Reeves personally escorted her through an intensive debriefing process that revealed not just the full scope of her family's legacy, but also her own predetermined role in continuing a mission that involved protecting Western civilization from threats that ordinary citizens would never know existed, never suspect, and never be allowed to learn about. The geometric patterns that her fellow soldiers had ridiculed and dismissed as pretentious artwork or attention-seeking behavior contained operational codes that had been directly instrumental in preventing terrorist attacks on civilian targets, facilitating the successful extraction of high-value assets from hostile territories, maintaining secure communication networks in regions where traditional intelligence channels had been compromised or completely eliminated, and coordinating responses to threats that could have destabilized entire governments. Sarah learned with growing amazement that she wasn't just carrying her grandmother's memory in the form of ink and skin. She was carrying active, current intelligence that could save thousands of innocent lives if properly activated and utilized by qualified personnel, or cost just as many lives if it fell into the wrong hands through carelessness, betrayal, or simple bad luck. Her quiet demeanor and unremarkable appearance, the very qualities that had made her seem invisible and unimportant to her peers, represented the perfect cover for someone tasked with blending seamlessly into military environments while maintaining connections to the intelligence community's most carefully guarded secrets and most sensitive ongoing operations. The character traits that had made her a target for mockery and social isolation were precisely the qualities that made her invaluable to operations that existed in the grey areas between official government acknowledgement and complete deniability, where success depended on the ability to appear ordinary while carrying extraordinary responsibilities. As Agent Reeves prepared to escort Sarah to her new assignment with a joint NATO-US intelligence task force that operated undercover, so deep and so carefully constructed that even their existence was classified at levels that required presidential approval to access, the base that had once echoed with cruel laughter at her expense fell into a respectful, almost reverent silence that spoke volumes about the dramatic transformation taking place before everyone's eyes. Colonel Harrison watched through his office window, his mind still reeling from the revelations of the past few hours, as his most underestimated and ridiculed soldier walked across the parade ground with the confident bearing of someone who finally understood not just their true purpose, but their place in a larger scheme of global security that stretched back generations. The tattoo that had made her the target of months of ridicule and casual cruelty now marked her as one of the most valuable and irreplaceable assets in the entire Western intelligence community, a living, breathing link to operations that would remain classified for generations to come, and secrets that would die with their keepers rather than risk exposure. Sarah's dramatic transformation from mocked recruit to honored operative sent visible ripples of shock and reassessment through Fort Benning's entire hierarchy, serving as a harsh and unforgettable reminder to everyone present that in the complex world of military intelligence, appearances could be not just deceptive, but fatally misleading for those who made assumptions based on surface observations. Her fellow soldiers, the same people who had spent months making elaborate jokes about her weird art and questioning her commitment to military traditions and values, now understood with crystal clarity that they had been in the presence of someone whose family had literally helped shape the course of modern warfare, international relations, and global security for the better part of a century. The last anyone at Fort Benning would ever see of Private Sarah Chen, she was boarding an unmarked aircraft with Agent Reeves and her team of specialists, her grandmother's carefully planned legacy finally fulfilling its intended purpose, as Sarah stepped confidently into a shadow world of international intrigue and classified operations that had been patiently waiting for her arrival since the day she was born, into a family of hidden guardians and silent protectors.